willing, it is now time to clear and cleanse the region of these devils. It is now time to show more resistance to the Americans and show our resistance with action, to tell those Yankees to get out of here, get lost.
In the early hours of Friday morning, shortly after arriving at Baghdad International Airport, U.S. missiles killed Soleimani and his close ally, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the deputy head of the Iranian-backed Iraqi militia, Hashd al-Shabi. Other members of the group were also killed in the attack. A drone strike hit their convoy as they left the airport. For Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Soleimani was a trusted confidant, a member of his inner circle. His killing in a targeted attack, the most extreme escalation in tensions between Tehran and Washington in recent years.
Back talking about the latest killing and assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani here. A lot of people saying this, a lot of spin about this killing, what's behind it, and some people say he was on a peace missions and Trump trying to sabotage that missions. Some people talking about the revenge for what he's been doing and supporting militia there in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, killing American and all of that, imminent threat, operation. So a lot of spin going on, but media spin has been, we've been used to it, and the problem is who consumed this spin and who consumed this corporate media spin. And let's talk to some of the media. They really are very independent, and they dig into the situations, and they kind of analyze it from all aspects. They're familiar with the issue, and they give it hard time. We have a guest today, Manar Mahawish. She is an editor-in-chief of Mint Press. And also we're going to get the reaction of Iranian Americans. We have Jay Shahidi. He's an Iranian American human activist, also worked with the human rights in the United Nations. Welcome to Bil Ahdan, both of you. We'll start with you.
Thank you.
Manar, you started this beautiful, I like the name, and I'm sure there is a story there, Mint Press.
Yes.
It's like a soft, but you're not soft. I mean, how did your paper cover this, the killing of General Soleimani, and also your take on mainstream media here, and also some of the reaction in the Middle East, Iranian or Saudis or Al Jazeera, for instance?
Well, there's a lot to unpack when it comes to
with
the U.S. assassination of IRCG General Qasem Soleimani. We covered it in the way that media should be covering anytime a government goes and attacks and targets a leader of another country. We held our government accountable and showed the true story and profiled who this general was, Qasemi, and showed the reaction of people at home in Iran, and tried to give a different perspective than what the mainstream corporate media was providing here in the United States. The media here, as usual, was basically beating the drums of war and regurgitating State Department and Donald Trump talking points, and that Qasem Soleimani was the #1 terrorist, he's the #1 bad guy, when just a couple of years ago CNN was headlining Qasem Soleimani as the man successfully defeating ISIS in the Middle East and Iraq.
Trump did that.
It was under the Trump administration when Iran collaborated.
ISIS is an idea, and there's no such thing as entity of ISIS, but go ahead.
So we tried to provide an alternative perspective on the killing of General Qasem Soleimani and the killing of one of the top Iraqi generals as well. And when we look at the coverage that's being provided by the mainstream media, and even coverage by a lot of the state-sponsored media like Al Jazeera and a lot of Saudi-funded media like Al Arabiya, they present their coverage and describe Soleimani as this leader who led militias. He killed hundreds of Americans. He was a very violent and not peace-loving man. But if you actually ask who the names of these hundreds of American troops are that have been killed, the United States government has not released any list of names of people that have been killed by this man, only to show that he has been actively fighting and organizing people in Iraq and in the broader region.
But he was behind a killing of non-Americans. There is a lot of
Of non-Americans?
Yeah,
What do
like
you mean
in
by
Syria and behind, is very active in Malaysia there in Syria. Syria, half of them are either dead or refugees.
Well, if you want to talk about Syria, that's like another complicated.
No, what I'm saying, we don't want to come
issue.
across like,
Sure.
he was, he did a lot of bad things. But doesn't justify to go and kill him.
No, and whether you like Soleimani or don't like
not like.
Soleimani
What I'm saying is
besides the point, I
Yeah,
think.
exactly.
And that's what my point
Yeah,
is.
it's illegal
It's
legally
besides
to
the
do
point.
it.
Exactly. So to have the United States government to go and assassinate
Yeah,
a
yeah.
top military commander of another country, I mean, that is basically an act of war. It's illegal what the United States did under international law. There was no congressional approval for this
Well, how about
assassination or anything like that.
What is the justification of killing him? Who benefit from it? When you look at the benefit, you have the Ayatollah were in troubles, and they have millions of Iranians who were protesting against their government because they are wasting the resources in Syria, Iraq, and all of that. And all of a sudden, millions are just rallying around the Ayatollah. So I think the Ayatollahs benefit from this big time. Also, the impeachment and Trump, now the headlines is changing. So when you know what's behind that killing, you look who benefit from it.
Right.
So the idea that is he really, I don't know if you dug into this, when he was on a peace mission to bring the Saudis and the Iranians,
Yes,
was that something to that?
Yeah, so at the time that he was assassinated, we have local media reporting. Actually, the Iraqi government had reported that Qasem Soleimani was on a peace mission to de-escalate tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran to try to unite the two countries together.
Policy, whatever.
Policy-wise. And so I think the biggest beneficiary of this assassination are two groups. Number one is Trump, because he was just about to face impeachment hearings.
Yeah, headline change at
Exactly.
least.
And second of all, we actually covered extensively that Soleimani was targeted by the state of Israel just a couple of weeks ago when they failed.
And
so
it
Netanyahu
has the print of Mossad's.
Absolutely. And so we have two groups, which is the Trump administration and also the Israelis, who failed at their assassination of Qasemi just a couple of weeks prior.
Really?
And they openly asked the Trump administration to finich the job. And because Trump is in such a desperate position to keep his status as president and to continue his presidency, he took on this status to assassinate him so that he can prove that he is this ballsy, tough guy leader.
He's not Obama.
Right, well.
Well, Obama has his own problem, too.
Obama has his own problems, but
Jay, I know that there is an interesting reaction from the American people. There's a lot of anti-war movement marching in the streets all over. And that's very different than other wars. And so that killing really moved a lot of people, and they don't want to repeat what happened with Bush or whatever. But we don't hear much about the Iranian Americans here. So what's your take on that reaction?
Iranian Americans in the United States are made up of a variety of groups.
Yeah.
Actually, I would say, I don't have any statistics, but I would say out of approximately 2 million Iranian Americans, a large part, maybe over 50%, are against this regime. They want this regime gone.
Which regime?
The regime of the Ayatollahs,
Yeah.
the regime of Islamic
Well,
Republic.
those are the ones who mostly left after the revolution.
There has been demonstrations in Los Angeles, and there have been statements on Iranian American media, like Iranian American television channels, that some people saying, great, we should have killed him earlier. But the majority of Iranian Americans, I would say, are very, very worried about this action, because they believe it brought us one step closer to war. It was a declaration of war. It was an illegal act. So they're worried about themselves, their families, whatever they've left behind in Iran, and they're worried about their own status in the United States, because if there is
Did you
a
see
war,
those 50 wars? How many people were detained on the border?
Detained at the border, yeah.
Yeah, Iranian American.
well, I heard
Born
about
here.
Anywhere from 60 to 200 Iranian Americans went to a rock concert in Canada,
Yeah,
and on the way back, they were stopped and asked about their political opinion. This gentleman was a bad guy or a good guy. Beauty is in the eye of a beholder. Exactly. He was a hero to most Iranians.
That's fine.
Because he was defending their country, their system, their Islamic Republic, their nationality, whatever, or he was defending their version of Islam. But to Americans and to some of America's allies, he was a terrorist. But I think that's an incorrect term. If you want to call him an enemy of the United States, a military man who was taking orders from an adversary government of the United States, that makes more sense. But calling him terrorist because he was helping the Iraqi militias or Hezbollah or Hamas, all these groups are significant portions of the people of those countries. Hezbollah is not a party, it's not a terrorist group. It's a significant part of the Lebanese people. So if you want to say the United States has been at war with Iran and this guy was our enemy and we decided to kill him, to me that makes more sense. But despite all that, it's an illegal act, and the United States is part of the Geneva Convention, and morally, it's not good for the strongest, most powerful nation, which claims some kind of a moral ascendancy, just to go shoot anybody that we don't like. Now, what role modeling is that for all the dictators and bad guys? The bad guys are going to do the same thing. So, well, Mr. Trump did it, so I can do it too.
You know, the Americans' history, it's full of this. Assassination, and FBI and CIA's assassination all over the world, South America, and everywhere. That's nothing new. Well, and the idea that the Democrats comes and they take some higher moral ground, this is just a joke.
This is an overt action where the President of the United States orders it in front of the world media and say, okay, here's a chance to go kill this guy. Now, from a point of view of legality and morality and ethics, that was incorrect, and I'm sorry he did it. It was a grave mistake. From a logistical point of view, strategic point of view, it actually strengthened the Islamic Republic. Even the people who don't like the regime, even the people who are protesting.
Regardless of your, you like the guy, you don't, again, it's
now they've
act.
united. Of course, this tragic event of a Ukrainian airliner, these are side effects. It's terrible. Those people were negligent. There was management problems. Like they should have shut down. The military in Iran should have shut down the airport to prevent any passenger flights going. So they goofed. They made a terrible mistake.
I can't believe how incompetent this part of the world is. And the way they talk and rhetorics, we're going to do this. And when you see their act, it's very incompetent. This is very...
It's terrible, but it has happened. A Ukrainian military...
They missed all the target there in Iraq when they were hitting.
It's ironic. The Ukrainian military shot a Russian jet in 2001 over the Black Sea, and 76 people died. American Navy shot an Iranian passenger jet.
I don't believe in mistakes and those stuff. There's no mistakes. Manar, tell us a little bit about your newspaper. What do you call it? Online newspaper?
Yeah,
magazine?
we're online news. It's Mint Press. I founded it
how long ago?
About 7 years ago. We're hitting our 7-year anniversary here in 2020. And we're an independent watchdog journalism organization. We heavily cover war. We're vehemently anti-war. I'm sure you know that from following our coverage. We cover U.S. empire and the military-industrial complex.
Like empire. They act like an empire, but empire is declining now.
Well, the United States is the largest empire the world has ever seen.
Do you know an idea how much they spent on military comparing to the...
A very high number in the
more
trillions.
Than the next six one, I think.
Yes, a lot of money, and it's enough money to rebuild the water infrastructure, the road infrastructure in this country.
Homeless, education.
Fix homelessness, absolutely. And so we believe that journalism should be acting as a watchdog to those in power.
Fifths, whatever they call them.
Yeah, we're the fourth estate. Fourth estate. So we cover U.S. empire, not just in the Middle East. We cover it all around the world, from South America.
South America too.
Absolutely, in Africa. NATO expansion.
So how do you get your news? You have what, reporter?
We have correspondents all across the country. I mean, for example, right now we're working with a correspondent in Bolivia. He's covering the U.S.-backed coup in supporting of the right-wing Agnes
What happened to this
Janine government in Bolivia. Evo Morales is in Mexico at the moment. I believe he's seeking refuge in Argentina very soon. But yeah, I mean, we're covering. We have correspondents around the world.
We don't cover this guy left, and we don't know if this just happened. Like, we have no saying in it, and no hand in all of this. And what the United States is doing in South America is horrible. It's even worse than what's doing in the Middle East. But you know,
it's the same policy, actually. It's
yeah.
the same policy of supporting right-wing governments and right-wing movements and.
Going after oil resources.
After oil and resources, the countries that we go after are very rich in resources, and they also have expelled any sort of Western interference in their industries. I mean, that's why Iran is a prime target. I mean, they are very resistant to Western imperialism. They're also the largest gas. They have gas and oil. They've revolutionized many of their industries in their country. Same thing for countries like Venezuela, who has some of the largest oil fields in South America, and countries like Bolivia as well. So that's
they don't
where
care
that's where
what
our
size,
coverage,
what size, what religion, what national. Jay, you know, the history between the United States and Iran, it's a very long and bumpy history.
Well, I just want to say that I'm speaking as an American. I've been here over 50 years, and America has done great things too. I mean, America went to World War I and World War II, basically saved the world from totalitarians. They had the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, to rebuild Japan, brought democracy to them. On the other hand, we've had terrible things done too. For example, listening to the oil interests. That's why in 1953, our government sent the CIA with the British intelligence to overthrow the duly elected Prime Minister of Iran, a democratic person, a Western educated
is this a plus?
Dr. Mossadegh. And then we just said we don't want him because he nationalized the oil, because the Iranian people said, why should the British own all the oil under Iran? And he actually came, Mossadegh came and met with President Truman. President Truman accepted his logic. He says, okay, you produce the oil, sell it in the open market. And he was no communist, he was no troublemaker.
Well, the British were still an empire at the time, you know, I think declining.
Well, this was after World War II. The British were declining. That's why they couldn't do it themselves. They came to... And then John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State, lied to President Eisenhower. There's plenty of evidence. He went and said Mossadegh is a communist, but he was a very democratic person. And he
nationalist. Most of nationalists, South American world, were
he
fought
basically
as a communist.
said if democracy is good for Europe and America, it should be good for Iranians and the rest. So he became a role model. And then they overthrew him, and then the bad blood started. And then what happened, it led to the Islamic Revolution, and it led to all the troubles we've had up to now. So that was a grave mistake, but we've done that because we've listened to certain economic interests, like the banana industry in Guatemala wanted us to overthrow President Arbenz, who was again elected as... Though we have to stop those things, and that's why we created the United Nations. Eleanor Roosevelt convinced her husband, President Roosevelt. They pushed the creation of the United Nations during World War II. The purpose was to bring our issues to the world body. And now we are moving away. This administration is marginalizing, pushing the United Nations to the side and saying, well, we don't need them. We are too strong. We can do what we want. And we are getting the results, which is going to come back to haunt us. After 19 years, we haven't even been able to defeat the Taliban, the ragtag Talibans in the mountains of Afghanistan. We haven't been able to defeat them, and our president is negotiating with them.
National movement, no matter how. Since when we defeated anybody?
They defeated the Afghanis, defeated the Russians, the Soviets. The Afghanis defeated the Greek Empire of Alexander.
Have the right to represent themselves, the national, regardless. Taliban, Hezbollah, these are national movement, against or not. We cannot just go and fight people or fight ideas.
These
That's the
national
problem, the perpetual
movements,
wars.
these radical national movements usually come about as a reaction to British colonialism or American neo-colonialism.
We worked with Taliban when they were fighting the Soviet Union.
Exactly. We supported them, we gave them weapons.
Was fighting the Soviet Union. So we don't have a moral framework that define our foreign policy. We have democracy here, relatively human rights, but when it comes to treating the color of brown people,
we have great, smart, brilliant, patriotic Americans in the State Department, in our intelligence agencies, in Defense Department, but our presidents, our national leaders often yield to certain economic interests and go around them. You know, the entire military and State Department intelligence has been cautioning President Trump not to get involved in Iran, not to provoke Iran.
Good luck
but
with
he
that.
still does.
Manar, what are you working on now? I mean, what's your story working on? I'll give you the last comment. Is there a story that we don't know about it that you're gonna break it?
Well, if we're going to break a news story, I wouldn't tell you.
Give us some hint.
About it first,
Give us some hint.
If you don't mind, I actually would like to go off of his point because it's something that we cover often. I actually agree with Jay. There are a lot of patriotic people that work within government that are advising the administration, advising the president not to move forward with the war. I've interviewed Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who sat in front of Congress with Colin Powell to testify that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and he regrets that move. And now I'm sure you know him. Yeah. He works with Colleen Rowley, and he works and advises, people within government to advocate for less militarism abroad and less war policy, and to make peace and bring peace with countries. And so that's actually something that we cover often too, is the good and the positive within government that with people that are trying to actually make positive change. But it's really hard to make positive change without getting money out of politics. I mean, we have very strong lobbyists, we have very strong think tanks that are being funded by foreign governments, by foreign interests, and by military interests, by neoconservatives.
Regardless of who win or lose wars.
Yes, by neoconservatives as well, and neoliberals too. And they work as chameleons within both the Democratic and the Republican Party to advise both parties in supporting these very atrocious wars abroad. And then they also influence a lot of the policies that increase homelessness, that increase social justice issues here at home. And so we have a very structural issue that we have to face in this country in getting money out of politics. And that's something that we have, you asked, what do we cover? That's something that we also heavily cover as well. And so to get to the bottom of all of these issues, we really have to focus on getting money out of politics. When that will happen, I don't know. And if that's even possible,
keeps you in business. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you, Jay.
Your time.
Jay Shahidi is an Iranian American, also United Nations human rights activist, and Manar Mohawish is editor-in-chief of Ment Press. Is online. You can find it online, digging into the truth and trying to hold government accountable. This is our show. We'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum, and God bless you all.
This was a very small missile. That's why the plane had the time to sort of land and to crash. It did not explode straight away. So they were not aware. I did not know to defend them. So our military forces, neither the IRG, was aware about it. But we are regretful, and we also are in pain, and we share the pain of those families who lost their loved ones. So basically, this happened due to the heinous activities of Americans that night. We were ready to confront in any way. There was a prediction that anything could have happened because there were so many airplanes in the air, some aircrafts and fighter jets. There was a possibility for missiles to fire at us, so we were ready. Unfortunately, because of a very small decision made by an individual, this tragedy happened.
Well, crowds of students in central Tehran are protesting the government's response to the airliner's downing. And they chanted death to the liars and called for the resignation of those responsible for shooting down the plane. The protests are in front of Amir Kabir University, where a vigil for the victims had earlier been held.